With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Chaf Hey. Before we give the intro, at the end of yesterday's shiur, on top of Chaf Hey, we were speaking about a goy bringing an article to a Jew on Shabbos, and if he brought it michutz l'tchum, even if there's a non-muktzah issue, but simply by the fact that a goy did something that's prohibited for a Jew, that in itself will not allow the Jew to derive benefit from that article. So we spoke Bekitzur about how do we deal with packages today that from Amazon that comes to us on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. And Bekitzur, according to many contemporary halachic authorities, first thing we have to do is to determine what is in that package. If the item in the package is muktzah, someone sent you a computer, then there is an issue of moving it, unless you move it kala'achar yad, simply because you can't move muktzah. As far as the concern of did it come chutz l'tchum is concerned, so there's a tosfos here that says that if you have a suffix, if it came chutz l'tchum or not, you are allowed to be lenient. Don't forget that the whole dinim of tchumen, like we learned, especially the 2,000 amma tchum is midrabanan, and I heard that being that Amazon and the other big companies, when they ship packages to you, they have local distribution centers, and therefore there's a high chance, probably it did not come chutz l'tchum, that the tchum issue is a non-issue, ad kedei kach, that many people will say that if it was not iskatzoi date minei, that means if you did not completely rule out the possibility that it might come on Yom Tov, that you can actually use it on the day that it comes, if the item again is not muktzah. Anyways, this is a very important topic, but let's now begin with the intro for today's shiur. We're going to first learn about someone who plugs a water canal from before Yom Tov, meaning that all of the fish that you find in there on Yom Tov certainly was brought in there, came in there prior to Yom Tov, which is our topic, and therefore you will be allowed to take the fish from that canal if there would not be a tzeda, a trapping issue. We're going to have a very important machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos. How does one acquire something from Hefker? And I will explain why Hefker is, at least according to many Rishonim, different than other acquisitions when I'm acquiring something from another person. We're going to have a Mishnah that speaks about shechting on Yom Tov. We are allowed to shecht on Yom Tov, but don't forget you can only shecht on Yom Tov or do any other food-related item on Yom Tov for Yom Tov itself, which was the whole topic of the beginning of the second perek of Eruv Tavshilin, that you, according to Rabbah Midah Iraisonach, you cannot prepare from Shabbos to Yom Tov. Even according to Rab Chizda, you may not prepare from Yom Tov to the weekday. What do we do if we have an animal? The animal is very ill, and the only way to make sure that it doesn't die, and therefore nevela, is to shecht it immediately. Is there a scenario where you are allowed to shecht it on Yom Tov? That's going to lead us into eating from meat from animals prior to it being skinned and dismembered. And there is an etiquette, there is a derech, it's not halacha, that we're going to learn about the proper way to eat. We're going to, because of that, speak about the proper way to drink wine, not to overdrink, even though we learned that when it comes to a koshel bracha, you should dafka gulp down a large amount at one go, but that's when it comes to a mitzvah. But other than a mitzvah, the right etiquette, which is going to lead us into more agadata about the beautiful, powerful limal yusa, stubbornness of the Jewish people. And we're going to learn again about certain activities that are not inherently problematic, but there is a certain amount of uvda dechoil. It's like a mundane type of activity. It somehow is mizalzel in the kedusha of Yom Tov. It's something that's a little bit difficult to put the finger on, and therefore it's so important every time we learn yet another Mishnah or Gemara that speaks about uvda dechol. It gives us a better insight how to define what goes into that category, what does not fall into that category. And if we'll have time today, we'll begin on the Mishnah at the end of Chafei Amid Beis that introduces the dinim of a bechor on Yom Tov. A bechor is the first male offspring of a female domesticated animal that has automatically a kedusha of a bechor. Meaning, not only do you have to gift it to a kohen, but the kohen himself may not do anything with it. He has to bring it and slaughter it in the Beis HaMikdash as a korban. which means nowadays that there's no Beis HaMikdash, there's nothing you can do with it. If and when the animal gets blemished, then it becomes property of the Kohen, and the Kohen may eat it. Who is going to determine if the animal is blemished or not? So you have to know the laws of what is called a halachic blemish, and there are people that need to receive special smicha, special permission to render rulings whether an animal is considered blemished or not. Certainly the owner, the kohen, has no such qualification because he is negei b'davar, there's a conflict of interest, but you had people that we will call them mumches, or in the singular a mumcha, an expert, and they would give rulings whether that animal is blemished or not. And we're going to see how all of this plays into our dinim of Yom Tov. In other words, if an animal was already declared blemished a b'chor prior to Yom Tov, Shalom al Yisrael, then this animal can be shechted on Yom Tov. What happens if the animal was not declared that it's blemished before Yom Tov? So as far as you knew then, no one was allowed to benefit from it. Can you declare it blemished on Yom Tov? In other words, can you render such a type of halachic ruling on Yom Tov? We know that generally one is not allowed to adjudicate lawsuits on Yom Tov. Is that included in paskening whether it's a mum or not? And even if you are allowed to adjudicate such a case, well, maybe you can argue that when Yom Tov came in, no one yet knew that this animal is blemished. So is it even going to help you if you discover now during Yom Tov that it's blemished? Will it make a difference whether there was a blemish there from before, or whether it developed a blemish on Yom Tov? And all that will really lead us into the sugya daf chavav. We might have time to start with that today or not, but let us begin on daf chafei amud aleph. Again, we are 2 lines from the top of the amid. The Gemara says, Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, in the name of Rav, that hasoicher amas hamayim me'erev Yom Tov, if a person is going to plug up a narrow canal of water from before Yom Tov, meaning that if you will find fish in it on Yom Tov, for sure the fish was already in that canal before Yom Tov, because there is no way for fish to enter in there on Yom Tov because you plugged it up. And therefore we resolved both of the topics that we learned about yesterday. Number one, this is very important, as the Rishonim speak out, even though the Pedic began telling you that you may not trap fish from an enclosure on Yom Tov, but that's because the enclosure that the Mishnah was speaking about was a relatively large enclosure. And therefore the fish in there are not yet considered trapped. You need to have a net or some sort of trapping instrument to get the fish from the enclosure. None of that is the case of this canal, because it being so narrow and so little, with one launch you get the fish. You don't need to have a net. So it's already considered trapped. Regarding the topic of muktzah, no, it was already in there. It was already in there from before Yom Tov. So therefore, says Rav, in the name of Rav, that Olamachar, Hishkim, if in the next morning when you wake up, you find fish in there, which they didn't enter there during Yom Tov, they entered there before you plugged it up, then mutarim, you are allowed to take it. In other words, it's not even safek muchan, as we learned yesterday. It's not even safek. Vadai, it was in there from before Yom Tov. Okay, so now on this, Rab Chizda, or we'll have 2 versions, who they built something on it. So now, Amar Rav Chizda, Medivrei Rabbeinu Nilmoid, from the teachings of our Rebbe, this is in reference to the great Rav, we can learn, and he listened to his comparison, that Chaya, if you have a non-domesticated animal, Shekinana bepardes, that nested in an orchard. Nested means it was about to give birth, so it's not that the orchard is encircled, but this Chaya made itself at home in a pardes, and it gave birth. Now a newborn is taka trapped. In other words, we're speaking about a type of chaya that the newborn cannot wander off. So says Rab Chizda, ein tzricha zimun. In other words, it doesn't have to be mizuman. The fact that it was already in there from before Yom Tov, it's already considered prepared, and therefore it can be shechted on Yom Tov. Upa. So the Gemara says that in 1 second. Amar Rav Nachman, that nafal chavrin, that our chavir, he's referring to Rab Chizda, he fell into berav revasa, into a big controversy. We reject the comparison that Rab Chizda made, chaya that gave birth before Yom Tov, to the case of the plugging in of the canal and the fish. Now, before we explain why one is not equal to the other, And indeed, this statement is not so pashut, it's controversial. Really, we're going to see it's a machlokes tanoim, whether this is correct or not. There is another version as to which Amoira built on Rav's fish statement to the case of a chaya that gave birth before Yom Tov in a pardes, concerning the newborn's status. Ika da Amri, that it was Amar Rabba bar Rafuna. Don't forget that Rafuna and Abchizda were both Talmidim of Rav. And here it's the son of Rafuna. Rabba bar Rafuna says that Midivrei Rabbeinu Nilmoid, again, Rabbeinu is in reference to Rav from the statement that Rav made regarding the plugged canal, that if you have a non-domesticated animal that needed to give birth, and it made itself at home, it nested in a orchard. The orchard, again, it's not that the mother is not trapped in there, but a newborn cannot move around yet. So the child, which we know came here, was born prior to Yom Tov, Einot Tzricha Zimun, right? It's for sure, in other words, it's already considered muchand, because it's trapped in there, so to say, because of its inability to move about, and therefore you can shecht it on Yom Tov. And according to this version, Rav Nachman, the same one, Rav Nachman says, oh, Nafal bar Chavren. Here it's not Chavren, because Rav Nachman was a Chaver, they were classmates of Rav Huna and of Rav Chizda, all Talmidim of Rav. Here it was Rabba, so the son of my Chaver fell into Berav Revasa in this big dispute or in this big controversy, and because you should not have compared one case to the other. Now why not? So Rav Nachman explained. Hassan over there, in the case of the newborn animal, Leika Avid Maisa. No one did anything. In other words, if you didn't do anything, I'm not speaking about you like we learned before by the birds. We're not talking about you handling a bird. That you don't need to do. But at least by the fish, you plug the canal. So that action is viewed as a zimun, as a muchan action for everything that's already in there. However, here you did nothing. The chaya on its own nested there before Yom Tov. Hach, in the case of Rav, in the case of the fish, ka'avid maisa. Gavaldik, and therefore, number two, v'loi nekuda like avemaisa. Not only can you not compare one case to the other, but now challenges Rav Nachman. I will actually find you tanoim that say dafka the opposite. What v'loi boy zimun? Are you telling me that this newborn does not need designation? No, it's not true. V'hatanya befedish chaya shekirna b'pardes. If a chaya. That's the nature of the way Hashem made the world. These non-domesticated animals, they're roaming around in the wild, but when they have to give birth, they find a corner, they nest over there, and it gave birth before Yom Tov. The Beitzah writes explicitly, Tzricha lezamin. In other words, if you want to shecht the newborn, you have to designate that animal before Yom Tov. Even though the animal was already there, even though taking the animal won't be considered trapping, pseider, so what? But what about the muchan, muktzah? And furthermore, v'tzipar durar, even if going from one type of creature to the other, we learned yesterday or 2 days ago about this type of bird. It's a small bird that always behaves freely. It takes a lot to make it submissive. These birds look very similar one to the other. So even if you actually lebei shamai, lebei silol, whether you needed to handle it, whether you needed just to designate it, once you designated the tzipar durar, there's a high chance that you will mix up the one that you designated with another one. So after designation, you have to do another step, and that is tzarech likshar b'knofeo. You have to bind its wings. Binding the wings isn't only to prevent the bird from flying away, but it is to make sure that you get the right bird. You get the one that you made muchan, kedei sheloi tischalav be'ima, for it not to be confused with its mother, because they look so similar. When a daughter and a mother look alike, that's a compliment to the mother. You're not insulting the daughter. Oh, so now, and not stam. You know who said this? V'zu edus shehi'idu mepi shmaya v'avtalian. Wow. It's clear, that means from the beginning of times, when the machlokes began amongst the Tanoim, different shitas, from then, this din is a clear din from Shmaya and Avtalian. So Mamish refutes the statement of either of Rab Chizda or of Rabba Bar Rafuna, and indeed to Yufta. Hold on. So the Gemara is going to say like this, that he made a comparison, he taka fell into a big machlokes, a big controversy, but There is a machlokes tanoim, because I can also tell you what umi boya zimun yasoy for sure. Everyone agrees that a taka needs to be designated this chaya. V'hatanya, I find another b'raisa. Amar Rab Shimon ben Elazar. This is regarding to how do you need to designate birds in a nest. Remember that whole machlokes we learned above. Again, do you need to handle it? Is it enough for you just to designate it? So regardless which opinion you take, both of them agree that al sheis mina matoicha kain. We learned all this above, that if there were birds, and whatever you needed to do, you did, but the birds that you designated were in the nest. And now, when Yom Tov comes in, you find them in the ledge, in front of the nest, with the scenarios that there was another nearby nest in which you did not designate birds, and that nest is now empty. So these birds, karoiv, enroiv, however, all the lamdas we learned before, that we have to take into account that it's possible that the ones that were in the nest that were not muksa flew away. The ones that you find in front of the ledge, they came from the nearby nest. Shasurim. And vaitit, let's keep on learning the Beitzah. Doves that came from your dove coat, or and v'yoina Aliyah. This is all domesticated doves that live in your attic. And siparim shekirnu, and the types of birds that they nest bitfichem ubebira, that they nest in types of jars that people used to place in the tall hoiche fenster ventin from the mansions. Aval, however, avazim geese, v'tanagoylam and chickens, v'yoine yahar disiois and Herodian doves. These are animals that are even more domesticated, as we learned. And and when it comes to an animal, even though it's a chaya, but if it needed to give birth and it nested in an orchard and it gave birth before Yom Tov, here the Beitzah says mutarim ve'ein tzrichim zimun. Boom. So here, good. So you have a Tana that says that this animal is already considered muchant. And let's keep on reading the Beitzah. And here also, if you designated this type of bird that they look very similar one to the other, so designation is not enough, because the chashash will be that you're not getting the one that you designated. So tzricha likshar b'knafel, you have to tie its wings, kedei shelo tischalav be'ima, not to confuse this bird with its mother. And let's continue learning the Beitzah. V'ha these birds that were tied before Yom Tov, and v'haminu ananim, and the birds that were handled, if that's the way you need to, if you have to handle them to make sure they're not muktzah, that you find the boirois in pits, ubabatim and in homes, ubeshichem and in ditches, ubema'arois, the first white line, and in caves. So all of them are mutarim because they're muchand. And now another detail, ubi ilanais, and if such a bird is found in a tree, even though the bird is okay, but there's another rabbinic reason why you may not take it, why you may not shecht it on Yom Tov, because if it's on the tree, asurim shema yalav itlosh, you might climb the tree and you might end up uprooting a branch, which is b'chlal de isur midrabanan, of leaning, even be, not climbing, not leaning, not even on the tzidei ilanis. Okay, another din, says the Beitzah, not related to Yom Tov, that the hamikusharim, birds that you find that were tied up already, and v'hamenu anim, and birds that were already handled, no matter where you find them, not Yom Tov related, even in the week, you should know that they asurim bishum gezel, you may not take them. No, it's birds that were prior to someone taking them, they were hefker, they were out there in the wild. The first person took them, so taking them gave ownership to the finder, and therefore it belongs to him or to her, and now no one else can take it because it's now an act of theft. So
Rabbi,
yes.
How would a person be able to tell when a bird is being menuna?
Very good. So the Rishonim say, Yakir, is that if I saw you handling a bird, I know that you did it because it's Erev Yom Tov. You took it. If I see that bird, aside of Yom Tov dinim, it's yours. Now, how did you acquire it? So we're going to get off tangent for a moment. For people that learned in Yeshiva Nezikin and Amachaya, they were very familiar with those sugyas. What type of kinyan do you need to do to be koine hefker? So Rashi here, these are important that Rashi says, and I'm reading towards the end of the narrow lines, that kina'am bahagba asan, you acquired it by lifting it up, shehefker nikne bahagba. So says Rashi. It says, Baruch has a question, I think, but I can't hear the question. Maybe it's in the chat. So you it says Toisvis, look inside the second Toisvis, that Rashi said that the first person acquired a bird from the wild, which is hefker, through lifting v'loy nehira. He disagrees with it. And Tosfos says a very important din, that if something is ownerless, only looking at it with the intent of acquiring it, that's called habata, will allow you to acquire something from hefker. Wow. Let me tell you the downside of hagba'ah. The downside of lifting king and hagba'ah, if you remember, we learned this concerning kinyanim. We learned this, remember when we spoke about making kiddush. How high do you have to lift something for you to say you lifted it? Remember that? 1 tefach or 3 tefachim, and we linked it to the kiddush when you hold the becher up the table. How high do you have to up? If you have to do a king and hagba'ah, it's possible for someone to take it. And if they won't even lift it 1 tefach, no kinyan. Tosfos says you don't need hagba'ah. Looking at something will help you acquire it. Now, where do you find such a kinyan? So it's important to differentiate when something belongs to you and it's going to become mine or vice versa. So that kinyan has to accomplish 2 things. It has to remove an item from the original owner's dominium, and it has to make it go into the new owner's dominium. So 2 steps have to happen. Even though 1 step is the main one, the other one is secondary, but it's a 2-step process. So the act of the kinyan has to have more koyach. It has to be something more substantial. Hagba'ah, meshicha, kesef, shtar, chazaka. When something is ownerless, since it doesn't have to be taken out of anyone's ownership, so it's only a 1-step process, that's Tosfos, so it's much easier for the 1 step to happen, and therefore only gazing, habata is good enough. These are big statements because many other times we find the opposite svara in Chazal, the concept of das makne, that if there's someone else involved and they want you to acquire it, their intent helps you to own it. But anyways, this is an important Rashi Tosfos, how do you acquire hefker? Chaver, we're coming back over here to the second wide line. To the second wide line, what's the bottom line? That now we find 2 tanoim, and they both differ whether you are allowed to take an animal that you know was for sure born before Yom Tif. So that's no doubt. So there's no issue of noilad, and there's no issue of muchan. And even though it's not an enclosed orchard, but it's a newborn, so you can have it. And the very fact that it was in the orchard, it's also considered designated, which is very difficult. And it's not muktzah, I get. But how is it? Who designated it? And there's a machloikas tanoim. So are we going to make this into a machloikas tanoim? So Amar Rav Nachman loikasha. No, it's not a machloikas tanoim. The difference will be haba. Ba means that Rashi writes that the child doesn't have to be designated. You know why Rashi writes? Because it's unable to escape. And therefore, the owner of the orchard already prior to Yom Tov had in mind to eat it up. But the mother, since it's larger, if you did not explicitly designate it, then it remains muktzah. Habe ima. Says the Gemara, no, I disagree with that. Ima, back in the Gemara, bezimun sagila, zimun is not enough. Because even though you'll be mezame in it, and it won't be muktzah, but since it's in an orchard, it's not trapped yet. So that was the beginning of this pedic. You can't take it because you can't trap. Say the Aliyah saboya. Unlike the newborn cannot go anywhere. So it's already considered trapped. So Elam, Amar Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, that Ida ve'Ida b'Dida. B'Dida means both braises are referring to the newborn, to the child. Ha begina hasemucha le'ir. If the baby was born in a garden that's near the city, which means that the owner is aware of the fact that a non-domesticated animal was born on his or her property. Look inside the last Rashi before the Mishnah in the first wide line. Vidate ilave. So they knew about it. It's amazing. That is why it's considered mizuman and you can have it. Ha begina, the Beitzah that says that you cannot take it, it's speaking about a garden, that's not smucha. If it's not smucha, the owner didn't know that an animal was born there, and therefore, even though it's trapped, so to say, it's not enough, it needs to be specifically designated, and if not, it's considered non-muchan, considered muktzah, and you may not take it on Yom Tov, all coming back that the comparison that was made from the chayesh shekinanam to the case of the fish is not a good comparison, because the fact that you plugged the canal, that action of plugging the canal, even though you didn't chop the fish, is considered the act of zimun. And again, it's already trapped because it's an amas hamayim. The amas hamayim is much smaller than the B button that we began in the Pedic. Okay, Chavra, moving on. Now, new topic. You have an animal. The animal is not muktzah, and you can shecht an animal. Shchita is okay. Shchita is considered a kitchen melacha, oichol nefesh, mutar on Yom Tov. But you can only shecht on Yom Tov for Yom Tov. Now, we also learned, once you are going to eat even only a kazayas on Yom Tov, you can shecht the whole animal, because the only way you can get to your kazayas is by shechting the whole animal. So the Mishnah gives an example where you have a person that really was not planning to shecht. Was not planning to shecht it, but we learned this in Chulin, if an animal is about to die, it's not treifa. A carcass has very little value in comparison to a properly slaughtered animal. So there's a time where you will quickly shecht a behema misukenes to make sure that it doesn't become an avela, it becomes basar shchuta. Says the Mishnah, behema misukenes, and lo yishchait, don't shecht it. We're speaking about if it's already late in the afternoon. In other words, it's not so simple for you to eat it. You already had your Shabbos meal. But you're going to lose the animal. At least there has to be enough time for you to eat a kazayas of it. Elim kain yeshu who's beyoim lech lemenu kazayas tzili. And the Mishnah writes tzili. That's very important, because cooking takes a lot more time than roasting. Not only that, prior to cooking, you have to go ahead and salt. That weiter takes time. So roasting, no salting needed, even though we put a little bit of salt on top, but there's no the water and the salting. The whole system is cut down substantially bisman and in actions. So if you have enough time even only to roast one kazayas and to eat it, then you can say you're doing it for Yom Tiv, and you are allowed to shecht it, even though the emes is, if not for the animal being a misukenes, you wouldn't have shechted it. You don't need it, but you can eat a kazayas. Rabbi Kiva Oimer, I'll give you a smaller amount of time. Afilu kazayas chai based tevichasa. You don't have to roast it. Guys, we learned this in Chulin, that even though normally we have to salting is only needed, especially when you cook. If you have a piece of raw meat, and here we're going to touch on the havamina, from where you slaughtered the animal, which would mean from the neck. We're speaking about the neck because it's already skinned there. It's already exposed, the flesh. Just take out a kazayas and eat it. Even if there's only that little amount of time, oichet good, because you can still eat some of it on Yom Tov. Oh. Now, shachta basad nudin, a healthy animal. You shechted it early in the morning, no problem. It's a whole new topic now. You shecht an animal in the field. You can shecht it, you're allowed to transport it, but don't transport the animal the way an animal is carried during the week. This is uvda dechoil. This is called zilzul yamtiv. Don't do activities that give the appearance that you're going about business as usual. You're going to work, you're shechting, you're schlepping. So lo yivi eno b'moit. Don't bring it on one type of pole. B'moit is another type of pole which demands a few people to carry. How do you bring it into the city? Aval maybe biyadei evarim. You one person can schlepp it, so you'll have to make many trips. Fine, dismember it in the field and come bring it in. And reading inside the Rashi, 3 lines under the Gemara, lo yiven b'mayta b'mayta. Don't bring it b'shnei b'nei adam. Why not? Mishum the afsha milsa. It attracts attention. It's like a big commotion, and umezalzel b'yamtiv. Now we all know it's very difficult to define what's called zilzel b'yamtiv. That's uvda dechoil. It's the same thing. What's not? But that's another example of Chazal, that when you schlep items, bring it small amount, not with a big fanfare, not more than one person carrying the animal, and therefore you have to bring it in evarim by dismembering it and bring it in limb by limb. Okay, now the Gemara is going to begin. Amar Rami Barabo. Hefshet v'nituach ba'oila, since we find that even a korban oila that is completely burned to God Almighty, first has to be skinned, then has to be dismembered, and only then is it offered on the altar. So says Rami, huadin likatzavim, that butchers also, before you eat any meat, you have to skin the animal and you have to dismember the animal. And mikan lim the Torah derecheretz, the Torah is teaching us through the dinim of korban oila, for all else, for basar taiva, a proper etiquette, shelo yoichal adam basar koidem hefshet v'netuach, don't eat meat before the animal was skinned or flayed and also dismembered. Now, the question is, even though Rami bar Abba used the words derecheretz, sometimes we will use these words even regarding halacha. And it's a big question whether Rami is making this as a halachic statement or proper etiquette. And the Gemara will explain the huge difference. And the Gemara wants to know, my komashvelon here means, is it just etiquette? Or is there a halachic reason why you are mechuyev to dismember, to skin it? And let me just say it out by heart. When you shecht an animal, do you have to see to it that the animal is not a treifa? And we learned in Chulin all of the various defects. And many of them you will not even be able to see whether it has that defect or not prior to skinning it, prior to dismembering it. Or once you shecht an animal, are you allowed to assume that the animal is kosher unless you find the siman of treifa? In other words, if you're going to hold that you may not make any such presumptions, then skinning and dismembering is obligatory. And if you didn't do it, then the animal has a suffix, it's not kosher. If it's only about etiquette, to be more patient, first to flay it, then to dismember it, then if you didn't do that, you didn't enter suffix, you ate not kosher. Let's read it inside. So Ilema, maybe it's a halacha. And what he's trying to say is to argue with Rav Huna. Rav Huna holds that when an animal is still alive, it has a status of it being prohibited. What's the prohibition of a living animal? Machlokes, very important here. Rashi Tosfos. Rashi writes 4 lines from the bottom, Ever Menachai. And because of that, when it comes to certain doubts, and many times if you have a doubt, well, what is its chazaka? It has a cheskas iser. Tosfos Bekitzer just says, no, an animal doesn't have a cheskas bechayeha. There's no Ever Menachai chazaka. And he explains why that will never work when it comes to a suffix. But what we're going to call is any animal that's not yet slaughtered, it's called isur, that it's not slaughtered. This is a very important machlekes, but at least we said the words. Let's come back into the Gemara. Until you find out that it was properly slaughtered. The moment you find out an animal was properly slaughtered, Rav Huna holds nishchata. Now, the shchita has to be proper. Once you know the shchita was good, halachically becheskas heterei medes, you can presume it's not treifa. Has a chazak of it being mutter. Until you find out how it became treif. And perhaps Rami bar Abba is arguing, and he's saying that since when the animal before shchita had a cheskas isur, you have to still assume that it's asur even after the shchita. Why would it be asur? Maybe it's a treifa. And therefore, at least when you skin it and you begin to dismember it, you can see the outer parts of the inner organs to see whether they're perforated or not, as we learned in Chulin. Is that what he's saying? The Gemara says that can't be what he's saying, because then our Mishnah won't work. Because we learned in our Mishnah, guys, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, like Rav Huna, which would be a problem if Rami meant to argue. The Tanan, Rabbi Kiva Omer, if you want to shecht an animal, be'emes, you're doing it to save the animal from becoming an avela. But you can do it as long as you are able to eat something on Yom Tov. And Rabbi Kiva says, "Afilu kazayis chai me beis tevichasa." Now, the havamina is beis tevicha means from where it was slaughtered. That means that theoretically you slaughter an animal and you can take out a kazayis of meat from the incision in the neck. You don't even have to salt that, and you can right away eat it. Hold on, if you're mechuyev to skin the animal, then you can't do that, right? It won't work. And my love, did he not mean? Did the Mishnah, did Rabbi Kiva not mean? So that would refute Rami bar Amma. If Rami bar Amma was saying against Rav Huna, he was saying beyond just derech eretz, but he was saying a halacha. The Gemara says, no, that doesn't prove, because maybe what the Mishnah means, what Rabbi Akiva means is, it means he should eat a kazayis from where the animal breaks down the food. Where does the animal break down the food? In the intestines. The only way to get to the intestines is by skinning and dismembering the animal. Maybe that's what Rabbi Akiva means. So our Mishnah doesn't prove either way, but I know what Rami could not have meant, because for Hatani Rab Chia, when he learned our Mishnah, he touched our Mishnah that Rabbi Akiva holds makoim tevichasa mamish, which is a minimum amount of time, shechting the animal before the end of Yontif, and you are able to take out a kazayis of raw meat from the neck, from the incision, because there it's already skinned. Then you can shech the animal. So the fact that Rabbi Akiva allows you to eat a piece theoretically without skinning, it must be that Rami bar Chama, the Rami bar Abba, does not argue with Rav Huna. Halachically, when you shecht an animal, once you know the shechita was kosher, now the animal has a cheskas kosher. And by the way, guys, this is a very important sugyas, and we learned this when we learned chulin, that since in certain regions there is a substantial minority, not a majority, a substantial minority of lungs that have issues, that's why we will not eat an animal before checking the lungs. In other locations, you also have to check the heart, looking for different types of simone tarfus. But that's different. That's because we already know that here the lungs have sirches. There are certain blemishes in the lungs, there are certain blemishes in the heart. But we are not going into this topic right now. We're going to say that both Rami bar Amma and Rafuna, they both agree that theoretically, when you shecht an animal, you can presume that the animal is kosher. You don't need to look for tarfus, for the signs of treifa. But Rami bar Abba is teaching you etiquette. Ella Rami bar Abba, daf chafei amud beis, as he says the words derech eretz, this is normally what it means. Oirach, ara, komash malon, he's telling you the proper manner of eating. We're learning here about the tremendous importance of patience, not to appear gluttonous or not to be gluttonous. Kidetanya lo yoichel adam shum ubatzel. A person should not eat garlic and an onion, may roishay, from its top. Ella may olav, only from the side from where the leaves grow out, which is what we will call from its bottom. And ve'im achal, if he eats it from the top, harei ze rafson, this is a gluttonous person. Kayoytze, similarly, lo yishta adam koise bebas achas, a person should not drink their cup of wine, it's wine, in one go. Guys, remember what we learned? That if we are speaking about koishel bracha, I think we had this in Psachim, or maybe we had this in Yuma, then you dafka do drink it bebas achas. You gulp it down. We're not speaking about a koishel bracha. When you're drinking wine, don't gulp it down. Ve'im shasan, if you gulped it in one go, this is a guzzler. And Tanach Rabbanan a little bit more about the right way of drinking wine. As we just learned, wine that's been consumed. If you have a revi'is, we're speaking about a revi'is amount around 3 ounces. If you give it one gulp, that's a guzzler. Shnayim, deracheretz, drinking it in 2 sips, that's the right way. Shloisha, that's migasa ruach. If you're sipping it more than 2, 3, or 4 or 5, like the Frenchies, that's considered arrogance. And let's go weiter. Now that we quoted statements from Rami bar Amma, now let's continue. For Amar Rami bar Abba, chatsuva. Guys, chatsuva is a type of grass that grows directly down. The roots don't go to either of the sides. Therefore, when Yehoshua, who had the greatest mission of dividing the Holy Land to every single Jewish family, imagine the politics over there, and making sure that I don't encroach on your territory, that you don't encroach on my territory, he advocated the planting of this chatsuva grass, which was a natural barrier, but the grass itself went perfectly straight down, not deviating. So the chatsuva plant is an expression of honesty that God imbued in nature. So the chatsuva grass is mekata ragleim dirishiyah. It's going to cut off the legs of the wicked. The wicked here refers to people that are not kosher in their financial behavior. So there is something even in nature that will be used by God to say, why were you not like the chatziva? Why were you not cautious you should not have encroached on that which belongs to your fellow. Similarly, nitiyah doesn't mean the natural young saplings. Nitiyah means the law of a sapling, which is the law of Allah, that if you plant a tree, when you plant a tree, you have to know how to count to 3 years, but one may not even have benefit if there are any fruits growing on the first 3 years. Patience, pavolia, mekata ragleyan, de katzovaya. So those butchers who, as we just learned on Amud Aleph, that sometimes they would shech the animal and right away eat the meat before skinning it. That's the connection. So they should have learned from the laws of Arla. Wait a little bit. Now, guys, we did learn in Chulin that having meat immediately after the animal was shechted, removing that meat. Remember, I think the animal was still biologically alive, which is something that a Jew is allowed to do because it's like a shacht and an animal. I think it has very good medicinal powers. Right, Danny? We learned something like that. But we're not speaking about someone who's having the meat right away because they have an illness and they need that type of the best meat in the world. No, that's a person who's he's a glutton. All right. So wait, patience. Or similarly, if someone is boyel nida, so then patience. Now, boyel nida is also doiraisa. So it can mean various things. We learned before all of the chumras that b'nais Yisrael echmiru al atzman by the din Torah, when a woman is a zava, not a nida, a zava. Let's say she's shemeres shem keneged yoim. So once she goes to the mikveh at day, and if she doesn't have a re'iyah until the end of the day, then she is tohira from when she went to the mikveh. Which means that if a man has a relation with his wife after she went to the mikveh, then during the day before night, you can't say right away that he was boil or zava. Wait and see. So if a person felt, anyways, I know there won't be any more re'iyahs. No, patience. Patience. Or many Rishonim understand that this refers to vestois. As we know that even when a woman is not a nida, you have vesta chodesh, you have oines haflaga, you have oines beinanis. Maybe Chazal said there's a chance that she might have a re'iyah. A person can say she's not a nida. No, patience. Learn it from the laws of Arla. Similarly, and the final statement that Rami Bar Abba made is turmusa. Turmusa is a certain type of bitter bean that only becomes sweetened after cooking it 7 times. And then it becomes sweet. It's a dessert. So he says that turmusa mekater agleyan disenem shal Yisrael. It will cut off the feet, and that's a euphemism now of the enemies of the Yidden. In other words, that there are certain things that are very hard, but after they're cooked 7 times, they change. And there's a certain stubbornness amongst the Jewish people that even after 7 times, we still don't change. And that is sometimes in the not positive, as we're going to quote it over here, Shenemar, that in Shoiftim, that Vayisifu b'nei Yisrael las Yisrael be'enei Hashem, that the Yidden kept on doing that which was evil in the eyes of God. This is referring to the times when we had a Yetzer Hara towards idolatry. As we learned in Gemara Yuma, that was taken away from us. We can't relate to it. And Vayavdu as Haba'alim, that's Avodah Zarah number 1. And then they served the Avodah Zarah called Ashtares, that's number 2. And Elohei Aram, that's number 3. Ve'es Elohei Tzidon, that's idol number 4. Ve'es Elohei Moav, idol number 5. This is not in the same time, but over the generations. Ve'es Elohei B'nei Ammon, that's idol number 6. Ve'es Elohei Plishtim, and number 7. And even after the 7 times, Vayazvu as Hashem, we abandoned God, v'loy avodu, and we did not serve God. In other words, even after 7 times, we still, and there was punishments. That means God cooked us, so to say. But we still didn't learn. We didn't get sweetened. Now,
Rabbi, will Elohei Sidon and Bnei Ammon will consider the Avodah Zarah?
Absolutely. Sure. Sure, of course. Yeah. By the way, that's why we say Elohei Dafka and not Elohei. A minor G. Now, 1 second. Now the Gemara, the Beitzah, or the Gemara is saying, hold on. This verse, the ending is like, it sounds like it's superfluous, because once it says Vayazvu es Hashem, that we abandoned Hashem, is Einu Yedei Shaloi Avdu. Of course, I mean, we abandoned, we didn't serve him. Matam Elohim Shaloi Avdu. Amar Rabbi Elazar, that's the word. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, afilu keturmas hazem, that even like this turmas, this bitter bean, that is, it's created with a bitter nature. But shesholkin oisa sheva pa'amim, if it's deeply cooked very a lot, 7 times, then it becomes sweet. It changes for the better. For oichlan oisa, you can eat it. And not only eat it, you can eat it as dessert. Kinuach hasud, the dessert is sweet. But even that, lo yasuni b'ni, my children were not that way. That they served 7 times and they were punished, they got cooked and invited. Oh, so this sounds like a negative. There was a negative. However, the Gemara right away counters the same midah is the greatest positive as well. Tana mishmei de Rab Meir. Why did God give us the Torah? You know why? Because we're the most stubborn people in the world. And that's what God needs. Because we're Azan. Azan is strong and stubborn. Because other nations, after all of the Golus, they would have abandoned Torah. They would have abandoned God. Which nation is stubborn? No matter what God does to us, we're still with Him. And right to the Tanach of Rabbi Shmuel, that when it says, we're reading this Bashgacha Pratis now, we're going to read this today, Monday, Mi-Minoi, that from His right hand, His is God Almighty's right hand, Eish Das Lamai, He presented to us a fiery das, a fiery law. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ru'uyim halalu shetinasim lahem dash eis. Since the Torah here, the das lamai, the eish das lamai is referring to the Torah. The Torah is fire. So who is worthy to receive fire? Only the Jewish people. We need to have that fire because we are fiery people. Ikada Amri, that the fire refers to the Jewish people. That Doseim Shel Elu, Doseim doesn't mean religion. Doseim here means the nature. The nature of the Jewish people is they are like fire. Okay.
Rabbi, what does Azan mean?
Azan means strong. It means, I would say it means strong. It means stubborn. It means chutzpah. And all, like in Pirkei Avos, as panim legehenim. In other words, there's good and bad in it. So the Gemara is bringing both. So there's a certain stubbornness that when we had the taiva for Avodah Zarah, we were stubborn. But the Gemara says, hold on, but it's good that God chose stubborn people. Akshanis, thank you. Okay. She'ilmalei, now when you have ilmalei already has the word loy in it. That's why we take the word loy out. She'ilmalei nitna Torah di Yisrael. If not that God would have given the Torah to the Jewish people, ein kol umma v'loshen yichayim la'amr b'fneim. We were so fiery, we were so az, that no one would be able to take the Jewish people. So what did God do? God married fire and fire. All of our azus is now focused, our stubbornness is focused on Yiddishkeit, which is beautiful. We don't give in an inch. We don't give up on anything. So now that we channel all of the fiery azus and Torah, so that our neighbors can handle us better. How does
it fit with like a Chazal of Baishanim and Golmelech Hasadim? That's you know,
we are that also, Yakir. But azus I just mentioned. Pirkei Avos says your question should have been as panim legehenim. And indeed, the as panim legehenim is because when we never gave up on Avodah Zarah until the Anshe Knesset Agdoilo took away the Yetzer Hara. So there's something not positive about it. And our Gemara, like all these Chazals are that way. It's not one or the other. It's one and the other. And first they write the non-positive, and then we always misimon the positive. And Domer Shlakish, second to last narrow line, that Gimel Azanein, that God created in the world 3 things that are very azuzdik. And what is that? The Jewish people are the most az nation from all the nations in the world. Lahavdil, Kelev is the most az animal from all the chayas. And Tarnagoyel is the most az creature from all the birds. The Yesh Oimnim, the first white line, that Eiz, not az, Eiz is the goat, is the most azuzdik creature from Behema Dakas. And the Yesh Oimnim, that when it comes to the plant life, Aft, Salaf, Be'ilonois, a caper bush, so people that are into homeopathic medicine, and you have to eat your plant, so this is a very good generic Jewish medicine. Anything that comes from a tzlaf, put that in your chicken soup, first taste, and eat it. But I don't know what to do with the kelev, but good. But these are the azus l'mal yusa. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, referring back to the Mishnah, Shchata basad, If you shecht the animal in the field, this is not a misukenes. This is when you can shecht an animal. The concept of uvda de choil. Don't start schlepping things in public in the way that people do when they are in a common weekday, when you're going to the market and you're carrying boxes. Lo yivi ena b'moit. And Rashi said in the Mishnah, it's not about the type of moit, it's about you need two people. So it becomes avsha milsa, it becomes publicized, it becomes everyone can see. So tutzach dam is schlepped. Has to be something done quieter, more modest. Tana Rabban in the second white line. Similarly, other uvda dechoils, guys, everyone is gold, because this is the insight to know when we say, aha, that's called uvda dechoil, and when we don't say that. Ein hasuma yoytze b'makli. This is a big statement. Now I want you to know that if a person, we're speaking about a blind person that is able to walk, not that he or she needs the stick to walk, it's dafke that this stick is as a extra support. For the extra support, you can't do. Uvda dechoil. Similarly, the roya, the shepherd, cannot go with his tarmila, with his pouch. You can carry on Yom Tiv. You go with the pouch when you go to work. So it's uvda dechoil. It's not an inherent problem. It looks like a mundane activity. Similarly, the ein yoitzin bekisei, people then, the groise fine schmeckers, they didn't walk. They would have other people carrying them. So there would be like these sedan chairs or other such chairs that the way it worked was, as we'll see in a moment, the right way of doing it is that me and you, we faced each other. I put my hands on your shoulders. You put your hands on my shoulders. So then we had our hands extending. And then they would put a chair on the top, and the groise knacker would sit on the chair on the top. So don't go that way. It's mundane, says the Beitzah. The ein yoitzin bekisei, and that's whether a man is going to be the one riding on the chair, whether it's going to be a woman. In all of these cases, it's called, Rashi writes, it's called uvda dechoil derech choil zilusa diyamtiv. Azoi. Now, the moment we're not speaking about an inherent problem, here is the beauty. So there are some times that there are other, here we go, that's a sedan chair, not the way I described it, but that's a different type of sedan chair. Again, you have a moit, you have different people schlepping it, don't do that. It's called a cathedra. So now, there are other competing values. And when it comes to competing values, we need our sages to tell us when you have to pick and choose which one will trump. So now the Gemara says, he sent to us the following, that there was once an elder that lived in our neighborhood, and he would go out, he would go out with his folding seat. People would carry him in that way, on Yom Tiv. And they asked Rabbi Shimon Levi, how can you do that? But he says, he didn't say blanket and you may not. He said that if many people need him, this Zakin used to give a class and he was old, he couldn't walk. That was the only way he would get there. Then mutter. And the sages relied on the words of the brother of Shakya that said that I myself, I would carry Rafuna on Yom Tov from the village of Hini to the village of Shili, and back from Shili to Hini to give lectures on Yom Tov. And the way he was carried, right? Or similarly, I would carry to the master Shmuel, even in the same location. He gave a class for many hours and he gave it outdoors. There was no indoor area large enough, and the sun kept on moving, obviously, so he needed to be in the shade. Or when he got very cold, he needed to go into the sun. So I would carry him from the sun into the shade, mishim shalatula, from the shade into the sun. So you could carry him. So the Gemara says, hold on. We're not speaking about a malach. We're speaking about some sort of mundane activity. Don't schlep big things in public. Say there. But there is another competing value. And that is, like it says, Hassan keda amar taima. Im hoyo rabim tzrichim loy, then mutter. So he was going to give a shiur. Shmuel was giving a class. All of these people, in order for them to be able to give a class better, here the competing value, giving the shiur, trumps the problem of Uvda Dechoil. Amar Rav Nachman lechama bar Ado. Who was Chama bar Abba? He was called the Shliach Tzion. Shliach Tzion is the opposite of a Meshulach. A Meshulach means you're coming from the Holy Land. A Meshulach, he's coming here. There would be Yidden from Bavel that we would send him to go to Yerushalayim. Oh, so he was called a Shliach Tzion. So they told this Chama bar Ada that next time, Kisolkas Lahasam, next time you're leaving Babel, you're going to Eretz Yisrael, so make a little detour. This is such a Jewish story. It's like they hear you're going to Eretz Yisrael today, they give you, you're going to Yerushalayim, they give you a pekel to drop off in Haifa. You're going to Israel, why don't you take it there? So they asked him to schlep something, that's a Yiddish minig. If you tell a person you're traveling, oh my God, you'll do a lot of mitzvahs. So they told him to make a detour to where? To Tzur. Guys, Tzur is in Lebanon. You hear the logic? You're going anyways, Eretz Yisrael. They told him that Akiv, at least they used the word Akiv. Akiv means make a detour. What's the detour? I don't know, 200 miles. Akiv v'zil asulma de Tzur. You might as well go up to Tzur. Now that's a mountainous area. That was a big schlep. Why? They needed him to do something. Because v'zil, oh my God, it's getting late. V'zil, Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, go to the great Rav Yaakov bar Idi that lived in Soir. Uboim, and I ask him this question. Kisa, ma'atun bey. What's your opinion about carrying people on these types of sedan chairs on Yom Tif, even though there's a contradiction. You could, you cannot. What do you hold? So what happened was, Ada Azul, by the time the Shliach Tzion went, Rav Yaakov bar Idi passed away. Okay, so he went to Tzur. He got there, he passed away, so he went to his destination. So Kisolik, when he went to Eretz Yisrael, he found Rab Zreika. So he asked that from Rab Zreika. Amalei, kisei ma'atun bey. What's house do regarding schlepping this chair? Amalei, hachi amar Rav Ama. That like this. Do it in a different way. Carry in a different way. How does that mean? Shelo yekatef. Don't use shoulders. That means it's not going to be two people. That's not shoulders. It gave him with all the respect. That's not shoulders that Rashi writes like I described, that I put my hands on your shoulder. You put your hands on my shoulder. So our hands becomes the sticks and the chair goes on top. That is what you can do. But if I want to carry you myself in a chair, one for one, that's okay. My shelo yekatef. My Katev, Rabbi Yosef explained that it means be'aloinki, as we just described. That is what you can do. So says the Gemara, how can you say that? It's not true. Rav Nachman allowed for his wife Yalta, the daughter of the Reish Galusa, that when she would go out on Yom Tif, she would have people put their hands on the shoulders of the others, and on top of that, they would put the chair. They allowed Yalta to go out with the aloinki. The Gemara says that's not a problem. Shiny Yalta, because she was afraid. If one person would carry her in the hand, then she would be afraid. So that's much more sturdy. If I put my hands on your shoulders, you put the hands on my shoulders. So again, it's counter values. On one hand, there's an uvda dechol. On the other hand, to frighten a yid, when there's a fear factor, then you say, do it in a way where the person is not afraid. Right? I mean, at weddings, you pick up the Hassan today. He's a tzitert. He's afraid. They would carry them on a Shabbos derigla, whether it means the Shabbos before Yom Tiv or a Shabbos that they gave a shiur. Again, they would carry them using shoulders. Two people or more would carry them. Also, mishum bi'asusa, because they were afraid that they're going to fall down. Or another counter value, mishum duchka de tzibura. In other words, if I carry you, it's going to take me more time to get you to your destination because you're not that sturdy. Once you're using this more sophisticated taka uvda the whole way, then I can get from point A to point B a lot quicker. So it's not only about whether the rider is afraid. That also, another counter value. We don't want people to wait. That important is it for there never to be duchka de tzibura or tircha de tzibura. That's the meaning of duchka here. You don't want people to wait. And if the way you get the chacham, the speaker, from point A to point B is by transporting him in a way that's otherwise known as uvda d'chol, then yes, break uvda d'chol, but don't make the people wait for the Magachir to give a shir. We'll stop over here, God willing, to be continued. And the